Good to see you, everyone. My name is Robbie Howell. Eastern European representation has come a long way in Age of Empires 2, going from literally nothing in Age of Kings and Age of Conquerors to actually having a pretty decent number of options in current day. We got the Slavs, we got the Bulgarians, we got Poland and Bohemia, and yet there is still so much more to Eastern Europe that the game doesn't really cover at all that really deserves to be showcased. And so in this video, I want to talk with you all about how much more AoE2 can split the Slavs in all of their many incarnations, along with a couple adjacent civilizations that often get bundled in with them. Now, I would obviously love to hear your opinions down below. And special thanks both to Temidin, who always helps me with these split videos, and also Tomasz, who is my go-to man for Central and Eastern European history. He fact-checked a lot of this, and I really couldn't have done it without him. So Tomasz, I salute you as always, my good man. Now, before we begin, let's talk about who qualifies. What civilizations deserve to be featured in this presentation? Well, in general, there are three major Slavic subgroups that, while we do see a little bit of representation among them, there's a lot more besides to be covered that just the current Slavs often ends up representing by itself. You have the Eastern Slavs, like the Kievan Rus and Novgorod, who are in what is now Ukraine and Russia and Belarus. You have the Western Slavs, like Poland and Bohemia. And then you have Southern Slavs in the Balkan states, such as Bulgaria, as well as unmade civilizations like the Serbs. Now, this is obviously a disgusting oversimplification. History is messy, and we have to force history into very tight little boxes to make Age of Empires civilizations. And so, yes, there's so much more to these peoples than just the umbrella grouping of Slavs, but I kind of have to keep it simple in order to make them fit within the context of the game. So apologies in advance for that. Maybe the DLCs could be based on these major regional groupings to keep things parsimonious, kind of like we saw with Dawn of the Dukes. Even if for the sake of simplicity, we have to oversimplify a lot of the history and the reality of these peoples and civilizations, I will of course be trying my utmost to capture as close to a believable reality within my eventual designs for these civilizations as I possibly can. I again will be talking about a few non-Slavic neighbors in this video. There are a lot of civilizations out there that are like distinctly non-Slavic, but are often like lumped in with the Slavs more broadly. And because of that, I will be talking about some such civilizations in this presentation, marked as always with an asterisk. Now, before we dive into my new proposals, let's talk about what I've done on this channel with Eastern Europe already. For example, an old video on my channel talked about the Moravians, one of the, if not the earliest, Western European Slavic power. It was kind of like an earlier split from the Bohemians, who they are, of course, very, very adjacent to. It was a pretty good build, and I still stand by a decent chunk of it. Another example was the far more controversial Novgorodians. Novgorod was a sovereign republic that held an unprecedented amount of influence on both the Baltic Sea and what is now northwestern Russia. You can think of it kind of like the Venice of the North. My build for it was pretty extreme, but I'm still quite fond of it, though there of course is still plenty of room for improvement. Another far more funky build was the Silesians, a kind of unassuming little area that has been juggled between Poland, Bohemia, and Germany for much of the Middle Ages and beyond. I had Tomasz's help directly on this, and we came to a very unconventional but very fun and annoying build that I think really effectively represents just what disproportionate influence Silesia had on the European economy during its heyday. Another Tomasz special was the Wends, a very early Western European Slavic people living in what we now know as Germany, who held kind of an enormous amount of influence right up until their last sovereign states fell in like the 1000s-ish AD. Kind of like the Silesians, this was a very interference-based design that I was, again, very, very fond of, but will take some pretty substantial revisiting in order to make fit with a more conventional format like I'm trying to do with my channel right now. Beyond these four civilizations, however, there were two major regional adds that I put on all of these builds, and you could imagine being on many of the builds that I propose in this video. First was a regional building called the Gord, kind of like the Krepost, but weaker and actually available in Feudal Age, though with substantial limitations. This would allow a Slavic civilization player to stake out territory very early, and would also allow them to train Druzhiniks, a hyper-elite infantry unit, though limited in number, that could even mount up to become cavalry. This would upgrade all the way to the boyar in Imperial Age and would mean I would strip the boyar as a unique unit from any Slavic civilization. And so that's all I've done on my channel thus far, but what more can be done? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let's dive into what I consider the must-haves for new Slavic and Slavic-adjacent civilizations in AoE2, beginning with the Wallachians. Now, they are not Slavs. What a way to start the list, right? They are what you often hear described as Vlachs, which are Romance speakers, the medieval ancestors of the modern Romanians. Now, both Vlach and Wallachian are suboptimal names. They are both exonyms that I think have German origins, but many people would propose using Vlach as the name for this civilization. I am not, only because I actually have another civilization in mind that is also Vlach in origin, and so this civilization would be based precisely on the kingdom of Wallachia itself, which was conquered by like literally everyone until finally fighting off Hungary to become an independent state in about the 1300s AD. It was later stomped on by the Ottomans, though did a great job of fiercely resisting them, as we see with Vlad Dracula. Yes, indeed, the current Slavic campaign is actually a Vlach campaign. One of the many reasons why this civilization absolutely needs to be in the game. My best guess for what they would look like would be like a trash civilization with a great early economy that builds towards like a strong early imperial power spike of some kind. But in addition to the Wallachians, there is another must-have civilization I propose, the Ruthenians, this one being properly Slavic. This is not a perfect name either. It's kind of an umbrella term in and of itself, but it is the best thing that Tomasz and I could find that concisely summarizes the Kievan Rus, the earliest Eastern Slavic superpower that ruled pretty much all of Eastern Europe from like the 800s to 1200s AD, even attacking the Byzantines on multiple occasions. They had Viking roots and had such incredible influence that many later Slavic states tried to legitimize themselves by drawing links to these earlier Kievan Rus dynasties. Incredibly interesting stuff, and my best guess is that the Ruthenians would be the closest parallel to what we see currently with the Slavs, but with an even bigger focus on infantry and a much better navy. Maybe a little bit less cavalry, though. Now, these two must-haves I think are really strong contenders and absolutely deserve to be in the game, but there are many others that deserve to be there too. Some top contenders for you now, beginning with the Muscovites. The Principality of Moscow was starting to kick around as a power in the 1200s, but really found its footing in the 1400s once the Golden Horde was finally being driven out of what we now know as Russia. They would, by the end of the AoE2 timeframe, completely dominate all of Western Russia. You can kind of think of them as being like an inheritor of the earlier Kievan Rus success, but there were many other important states in between as well. My best guess for the Muscovites is that they would be an ultra late game destruction machine with like a Cav gunpowder death ball that would be super fun to build to and absolutely sweep everyone off the map, but would be kind of tough to get to on open maps. It would be really cool to see a more like later time frame oriented Slavic power take the stage, but we've been talking a lot about northeastern Slavic powers. Let's take a look down south in the Balkans with the Serbs. Now, Serbia was surrounded by very strong neighbors for quite some time. Bulgaria, the Byzantines, the Hungarians, Venice, leaving it very, very fragmented early on, but eventually it would start to kind of come together into a single principality, and then by the 1200s, it would rule much of the Balkans as a prominent and powerful empire. It only fell once the Ottomans started to roll in the 1400s, which is something you will see happening a lot with Balkan Slavic powers. I think that the Serbs would probably be the closest parallel we have to the current Slavs. Great cav, great infantry, brawny high damage, but also having maybe even a bigger focus on monks. I've heard the Serbs thrown around as a civilization idea a number of times, and it's one that after doing a little bit of perfunctory research, I 100% get behind. And so these four civilizations are all the ones I think have the best claim to make it into the game. But there's plenty more besides that I think would be really cool adds as well. You know me, I don't want to stop with just the top contenders. Let's go on to the mid contenders, beginning with the Croats. Now this is another Balkan power, in this case focused primarily on the Kingdom of Croatia, which is like 900s to 1100s AD, but also would have some reference to its later union with Hungary. There were also other earlier Croatian states as well, but they were rarely autonomous. They had many powerful neighbors, again a common theme with Balkan civilizations, though during their golden years the Croats would actually challenge these great powers in terms of their dominance in the Adriatic and beyond. I think that the Croats would be another example of the Slav special of infantry and cavalry, but they would have a bigger emphasis on trash and also an excellent navy. I've also heard some people, Tomasz included for the record, say that the Serbs and the Croats are similar enough you probably would want them as one civilization, and I would personally be very reluctant to do that because, of course, you know me, I want to see more civilizations added to the game, and I did in my research find enough differences between the two that I think it would be reductivist to cram them both together, but if we had to have just one, I would probably default to the Serbs. Another mid-contender I want to talk about is the Bosnians, yet another Balkan state. They were independent in all but name from like the mid-1100s-ish AD, but would become an autonomous kingdom from like the 13 to 1400s AD, until the Ottomans once again brought them down. But much like the Serbs and the Croats, the Bosnians enjoyed their time in the sunshine as the dominant power in all of the Balkans for a good little while. In terms of playstyle, I think the Bosnians would be another levy/trash civilization with kind of a goth-ish spam-like identity. Maybe they're incentivized to scatter throughout the map, or they do well at rebuilding after being destroyed. Something like that could be a really cool way of giving them a unique feel. But there's one other mid-contender I want to discuss, one that is not, again, Slavic, that being the Hungarians. They are definitely not Slavs. This would be a time-split civilization from the earlier Magyars, with the Magyars representing pre-1000 AD steppe nomad origins, but when the Kingdom of Hungary was established exactly at 1000 AD, I think there is a big enough difference to 100% justify a separate civilization, especially because they were so important as the Kingdom of Hungary and would remain a major player right through the end of the AoE2 timeframe. Yes, the Hungarians and the earlier Magyars had some similarities, such as their emphasis on horseback riding and archery, not to mention their incredible militarism, but besides that, the comparisons kind of end. They were enormously different peoples, and cramming 1,000 plus years of history into one civilization is, as I'm sure you know if you've watched my videos before, one of my least favorite things. I think that the Hungarians would be a disgusting military powerhouse with great foot archers and heavy cav, but bad eco and probably bad trash as well. A sharp contrast to what we see currently from their earlier Magyar ancestors. Now, let's talk about some of the long shots. Civilizations I'm not quite as sold on, but still think would be exceptionally cool to have, beginning with the Albanians. Yet another Balkan state that got squashed by the Ottomans. They were not usually independent, unlike their northern neighbors, but they did have a couple of autonomous states between the 13 and 1400s, and their resistance to the Ottomans was absolutely legendary. The League of Legia, is that how you say it? Something like that. In 1444 would probably be the major focus for this build. I think that the Albanians would probably be a monk and defensive civ, noteworthy for enormous tenacity. And besides that, they'd have a healthy dose of the Slav special of heavy cav and infantry. Another long shot that I really would want to see would be the Moldavians. This is another Vlach people. The reason why I didn't want to use Vlach as the name for that earlier civ, they had a state north of Wallachia from the 1300s and onwards. You could argue they were too similar and should be clustered into one, but they were very distinct states that only fought each other and other people a lot, but actually had quite different approaches to military as well. They hit their high point in the mid-1400s, despite incredible opposition from a lot of very powerful neighbors. They had Poland, Lithuania in the north, Hungary in the west, and the Ottomans in the south, and they still managed to hold out, not being completely dominated by Ottoman hegemony in the way that almost all the other Balkan states were. I think that they would be another example of the Slav special, but with a big emphasis on defense and economy, unlike the more trash and early game oriented Wallachians would be. So I hope you see what I'm going for with that distinction, if nothing else. But with long shots out of the way, let's talk about the mega long shots, the civilizations that are a little harder even for me to justify, beginning with the Permians. They are definitely not Slavs. They would represent the Uralic Finns, though it would be particularly focused on the Komi people. The Uralic Finns inhabited most of northern Russia for a good chunk of medieval history, and are still, of course, present today, and they did actually have some noteworthy independent states. Bjarmaland, which was discussed in some Scandinavian sources, seems to have been a player from like 800s to 1200s AD, way up north, as well as the large kind of decentralized state of Great Perm from the 1100s and onwards. They entreated often with Novgorod as well as Muscovy, plus the Scandinavians and some other Finnic neighbors. My best guess for the Permians is that it would be an economy-focused civilization that had a lot of skirmishing and trade elements, as that is what they were known for in history. Another mega long shot would be the Carantanians. These were Proto-Slovians in what is now Slovenia, and formed an incredibly early state in the 600s AD after the possibly legendary Empire of Samo collapsed. This would be, again, a Western Slavic state that would focus very much on the early side of the AoE2 timeframe. The Moravians in Kiev and Rus would come hundreds of years later, and are kind of the earliest representation we have besides these guys, so I think they would serve a really cool niche. Tomasz proposed Slavians as a name as well, but that would probably be a much larger umbrella. I'd be okay giving it to the civilization if need be. Unfortunately, the Carantanians would fall after the 700s and would pretty much become a vassal of their neighbors, especially the Holy Roman Empire and the later Hungarians. I really do not know what they would look like in terms of their in-game playstyle, but again, I think that early Slavic representation is really cool to have, and so even if the research ended up being really tough to get right, I would definitely like to give these guys a try. And now let's talk about the ultra mega long shots. These ones I think it would be kind of tough to justify, but you know me. Beginning with the Ragusans. This was a republic on the Dalmatian coast, kind of between what is now Croatia and what is now Bosnia and Herzegovina. They were independent from the 1300s, and they were pretty much autonomous even during Turkish rule. The Turks kind of just let them do their own thing. And like I said, they were a republic, much like Venice, much like Novgorod. I did have someone in my Discord recommend that maybe they could be called the Herzegovinians, but I didn't really find any good grounding that Ragusa was Herzegovinian in origin, so maybe there could be a different civ called the Herzegovinians. I just couldn't find anything promising about that in my own research. But anyways, more about the Ragusans. They didn't do a whole lot of empire building, unlike Venice, but they were massive economic players, gigantic trade dominance, especially during Ottoman rule. The Ottomans just let them control most of the Eastern Mediterranean, and they prospered hugely because of it, and they were an arch rival to Venice. I could see them being redundant with the Croats. You could definitely bundle in Ragusa to Croatia, or maybe even to Bosnia, but I think they're interesting and unique enough to possibly stand alone as their own civilization. I think they would just be eco, trade, navy, all the way. Last ultra mega long shot, the Penkovkins. Can thank Tomasz entirely for this suggestion. This is not a specific people so much as an architectural grouping to describe a bunch of early Eastern Slavs. This is a bunch of different Slavic tribes and tribal umbrella terms like the Dulabis and the Kriviks and the Vyatiks. Another name that you could use instead of Penkovkin would be Antes or Sporoi, though I think Penkovkin sounds cooler, and I don't know about any other inaccuracies that might be lingering in these alternate names that I just don't know about. This would be representing a large number of very small states that were pretty much just tribal unions that would fight against like incoming steppe peoples and like the Kievan Rus as they were starting to take root, not to mention the Byzantines and Bulgarians, and I think that they would be an early game infantry civilization with better archers than most other Slavs, but have a absolutely atrocious late game. Like I said earlier with the Carantanians, I think that having some more early Slavic representation would be really cool to see, and since no single early Slavic state was powerful enough to merit its own civilization, this is an instance where I think an umbrella actually makes sense. And with that, we come to the end of my civilization proposals, but the presentation is not over yet. It is time to talk about some regionals, units, buildings, technologies, beginning with the Voivod, or the Knyaz. This is something I proposed in an earlier build. This would be an aura unit, kind of like a centurion, that could maybe boost troop production. Very, very expensive. Maybe it could like make units train faster, or you could conscript vills, and it can even have some like sub-regional variants. Like for the southern Slavs, they could have Zhupans instead of Voivods or Knyaz. Beyond this, though, another more far-reaching and unusual unit would be the War Wagon. Yes, these did actually exist, even though the current in-game War Wagon is nonsense, and the Hussite Wagon is implemented terribly. We would want to see this be the proper pack and unpack style of Wagenburg tactic that the Hussite Wagon should have been from the get-go. I want to see a defensive siege unit, really resistant to incoming arrow fire, resistant to incoming cavalry charges, maybe having a little projectiles of its own, but primarily protecting those behind it. This would not be a common unit by any means, but it wasn't just used by Slavic powers, though from my research it seems that Slavic peoples did use it the most. You could see it in other civilizations as well. I know for a fact a few steppe peoples like the Khazars used them, and in general it would just be nice to see something with a little more variety in the Siege Workshop. Next, a unique technology called Barshina. This was a kind of corvée labor that was pretty common, especially in Eastern Slavic states, that evolved between like the 1100s and 1400s, and I thought it would be interesting if it allowed you to temporarily produce villagers very cheap cheap and fast, but have those villagers have a timed life. I was trying to go for something with this that gave the Slavic factions a unique economy feel as well as a unique military feel, and I think that this would do the trick. It was something that was pretty common all over Eastern Europe, though admittedly corvée labor is nothing new under the sun, and every state ever has had it. This is just how I chose to represent it here. And lastly, a regional cavalry unit called the Stradiot. This was a Balkan light cavalry unit, often fighting as a mercenary as far afield as Germany, Venice, and even among the Ottomans. And I think it would be a hussar replacement, kind of like the winged hussar, but with different strengths and weaknesses. For example, probably faster and trickier, maybe with a bonus against archers, rather than just being more powerful, if that makes sense. And with that, we come to the end of this Slavic subdivision journey. Thank you all so much for watching. I want to hear from you guys. Do you think I missed anything in terms of potential civilizations or regionals? And do you agree with my proposed implementations of some of the civilizations that I've touched upon briefly in this video? How far would you personally take this split? Would you draw the line at my mid-contenders, at my long shots? What do you think is the best way of going about this? Make sure to share your opinions down below and hop onto my Discord if you aren't there already. I'm reasonably active there and it would be great to hear from you. But until then, my name is Robbie Howell, and ciao for now.